A flock of birds attacks an airplane. The pilot was in tears when he found out why. Jason heard a loud bang. What happened? Their plane was already in the air. He frantically looked at his co-pilot as the crew rushed towards the cockpit. A large flock of birds was apparently chasing and attacking the plane. Jason tried to shake the bird off, but he must be careful. If only one bird hits the engine, the entire plane could crash. The birds seem to become more aggressive as Jason tries to shake them off the plane. Jason doesn't know why the birds are becoming more and more aggressive in the cabin. The passengers are starting to get restless. They heard the sound of the plane swerving, and no one could explain it to them. They could see flocks of birds through the window. It was as if they were in a Hitchcock movie. By the time Jason felt confident enough to reassure the passengers that they had everything under control, he knew it was too late. He doesn't know what happened, what attracts birds, and how would he calm them down. Jason had to call flight control to see what his options were. The number of birds is constantly increasing, and they are becoming more aggressive. But he was unable to contact anyone at flight control. Passengers could hardly see out the windows because they were obscured by birds. It made the entire plane dark, and there was a terrifying atmosphere. Passengers are very afraid. Some people even cried. Jason had to act quickly. Jason did his best to fly high and shake off the flock of birds. But if he flies too high, he will endanger everyone on the plane. Moreover, the number of birds was so great that they began to force the planes to fly lower. Jimmy gasped as he saw the buildings. Approaching now, they hovered menacingly above the city. Lucky for Jason, he can take the plane to the countryside. He realized that it was pointless to try to increase his height. He had to return to the airport and had to land the plane. But what to do? Finally, Jason received a call to immediately return the plane to the nearest airstrip. Jason didn't hesitate and circled the plane as fast as possible without harming anyone. When turning the plane around, they hit a few birds, which seemed to anger the birds even more. Now the bird is still hitting the plane, and small cracks are starting to appear in the window. Jason was informed that 911 was on its way to the airstrip. Only they can help. He had to do everything in his power to keep the plane from crashing. Not long after leaving the city limits, Jason noticed that the situation at the last part of the airstrip was about to get worse. Many birds emerged from the nearby forest. They saw the plane immediately. Jason had a feeling this would end in disaster. Jason noticed that the more birds attack the plane, the closer they get to the engine. If a large number of birds get into the engine, it will be a disaster. The plane began to shake, and Jason could barely control it. At the same time, the plane decreased in altitude. Passengers noticed this and started screaming in terror. Suddenly, the engine caught fire, and passengers could see through the windows. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. A plane is falling from the sky. There was only one choice Jason could think of. This is his last chance. Jason had to make an emergency landing. He had never done that before. He only learned from simulations during his growing up years. He felt it was his duty to make sure everyone on the plane was safe. And then he saw something. While lowering the level, he saw a lake in the distance. This was their only possible survival. He was very excited about the landing. He might cause the plane to crash. Jason could barely land the plane in the water. It was not a soft landing, but he was sure the plane would not collapse. His only concern was the safety of the crew and passengers on the plane. Then he heard a scream. Screams came from the passengers. They are afraid. Jason froze for a moment, but then got up from his seat. The cabin crew is facing a problem. They must evacuate. Jason tried to open the door, but it was all blocked. He was slightly emotional due to stress and hopelessness. Luckily, one of the receptionists was able to open the other door. The plane was slowly sinking. There was still enough time to get everyone off the plane safely. The crew tried to calm everyone down, but some people don't care about anyone but themselves and try to leave first. Meanwhile, flocks of birds began to attack the person who went first. Some birds fly to the plane, but most of them headed towards the cargo hold entrance. What's in it? Flocks of birds began to fly in circles above the sky. The plane slowly sank into the water. The Coast Guard made sure everyone got out of the water safely. Passengers point to plane wreckage when Jason turned around. He gasped. The birds continued to circle the plane. It was as if they were searching for something within. Jason was confused. He really didn't know what could cause these birds to react like that. When they tried to get close, the birds became more and more alert. Despite Jason's warnings, but they were getting closer. As soon as we reached the shipwreck, they were attacked by a flock of birds. This scared the crew so much that they jumped off the ship. They swam back to the other boat. Passengers and crew were completely baffled. What's in the plane? When they come close, the birds began to fly again. The workers saw that the sky was dark with flocks of birds. This was a clear sign that they would have to wait. They called for backup to make sure the bird was startled. This time, flocks of birds gathered around the boat as they went furthest away. The departing crew was mobbed. Luckily, they quickly found a way inside. The tugboat was allowed to approach because the birds could not reach the captain. Luckily, Jason came up with a plan. He learned during training that airports startle birds by making noises. He told the Coast Guard that they might have a way to startle the birds. The Coast Guard took immediate action and sounded over their loudspeakers. Then something happened. The bird responded to the high-pitched sound and fled back into the forest. Coast Guard knew that if they stopped now, the birds would return. This was an opening to ensure the plane could be towed out of the water. Under guidance from the Coast Guard, a tugboat can attach a rope to the aircraft. They began to pull. Fortunately, the plane was easily towed. When the police arrived, Jason is at the controls of the plane. Therefore, he was immediately questioned by the police. Jason had nothing to hide from the police, so he told them it was just a normal flight. He has made this flight almost every week without any hitches until today. He noticed that once the bird reached the plane, they immediately headed to the cargo hold. This might be the key to finding out what's going on here today. Police asked detailed questions about the bag, but Jason pointed at the passenger. They may have the answer. Every passenger was shaking a lot, but they immediately answered police questions about what they were carrying and what was in their suitcases. Except for one person who was detained by police. This person was confused about why he came on this trip. Almost every sentence he spoke contradicted himself. The police found it very suspicious. He didn't want to answer when asked about the suitcase. They do background checks. This raises even more questions. His passport looked fake. The only way to identify him right now is his fingerprints. When they enter it into the database, they got a clue. This man was a recently released criminal. The government sealed his documents, so they don't know exactly what they're dealing with. They still need to find out why the birds react the way they do. Fortunately, the plane was eventually pulled out of the water. A special search party arrived at the scene to ensure that everything was thoroughly searched. But before they got on the plane, they heard many voices. The birds seemed to be approaching again. When they noticed that the ship had sailed, they immediately swarmed and destroyed the wreckage of the plane. Police suspect they were trying to break into the baggage department. The investigation team is now beginning to close in on the cause. They are afraid of birds and flying. It was not easy to get close to the suitcase because the plane was completely destroyed. The door was locked, but they had a special tool to open it. As soon as the door opened, they heard something. Outside the luggage room, they heard a noise. As they approached the suitcase, they were able to determine which suitcase the sound was coming from. Everyone gasped when it was opened. They immediately called the police to detain the suspicious passenger. The name on the suitcase matched the name on the fake passport he provided at check-in. The search team carefully removed the suitcase from the plane. Jason ran up to them and paled when he saw what was inside. He realized that the man was smuggling rare birds. After calling other law enforcement agencies, they received details about why the man was arrested. He had previously been detained for poaching. Upon his release, he immediately began committing new crimes. The man was eventually charged and will never be released again. He was also accused of endangering passengers. The birds attacked the plane because they heard the sounds of foreign birds calling for help. Jason is at the trial and lets out a sigh of relief. Everyone is safe, and that's all that matters to him. This story is a novel written for entertainment. The characters and events are the product of the author's imagination. Images shown are for illustrative purposes only. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories. We upload daily. I hope you enjoyed it and see you around.